from the TV30 studio, here's Jim Schneider.
Well, good evening. We welcome you to the program In Focus here on WVCY Channel 30. We're glad that you tune in each and every Monday night as we talk about issues that impact us here in our community, across the state, across the nation as a whole. Just before we do introduce our guests, though, we do want to make you aware that we are having our Days of Praise Share-a-thon this Thursday and Friday, a special time that we set aside from our regular schedule to invite you, the viewers, and of course those who listen by way of WVCY Radio 107.7 and our network as a whole, to tune in and to call to pledge support. Friends, this station is possible because of your contributions to keep the day-by-day operational expenses taken care of. And so we want to say thank you in advance and encourage you to prayerfully consider what part you can have this Thursday and Friday in our Days of Praise Share-a-thon on TV30 and WVCY Radio 107.7 here in Southeast Wisconsin. I do want to preface as we begin our topic this evening for the program that I am very thankful for those who work in the medical field who are really doing their best to put the patient first and put the patient's needs and interest at the center of their care. That's the case. Many of us can attest to the many times through the years, individually or with a family, where going through a time of illness, the right medication and the right help was given, setting a bone, giving sutures or whatever it may be, and thankful for that. But friends, at the same time, what we have witnessed during the COVID pandemic was a real eye-opener in the medical field across this country. But it didn't just begin with COVID. That's perhaps when it became more known to us as to protocols that were being followed in so many different situations. People who experienced COVID would go in and many people asked for some medications like ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine, were denied those kinds of interventions to take place. Instead, we're told about the protocols that had to be followed, how people were told that you must, we want you to sign that you give your permission for a ventilator, because oftentimes it's the middle of the night when people need this. We want to have that authorization put into place. Or we would find that there was the protocol of remdesivir, and people followed these protocols, and we found later, actually there were warning signs beforehand, but came to it that people's lives were actually being taken by following some of the protocols that were going on through the medical systems. Insistence was very much a part of this, that these are the protocols that must be followed. And if you deviate from theirs, my oh my, you're questioning medicine, you're questioning science, you're questioning all these things. And tragically, there are those within the medical administration of our time who are married to these protocols, whether they are effective or not, giving themselves over to big pharma, giving themselves over into institutionalized healthcare. Friends, we're witnessing some very, very tragic things in the nation of Canada, just our neighbor to the north as I speak. But we also know that it is beware where we're heading, the direction that we're heading right now. Beware if you're elderly. Beware if you are mentally disabled as to the value of your life. Perhaps is not the same as some believe that it has value to it. We're going to get into that and so much more this evening. It's our privilege to have with us Scott Schara. Scott is the father of Grace. Grace had Down syndrome, was 19 years old, tested positive for COVID, was hospitalized, and following the protocols carried out in hospitals around the country, they were approached with those protocols, but her life was tragically taken October 13th of 2021. Scott is presently engaged in a landmark lawsuit right now, Schara versus Ascension Health et al. He does warn about the dangers of incentivized healthcare and where this is leading. He's got a lawsuit that is scheduled for a jury trial next month, June of 2025. Scott, so good to have you here with us on In Focus. Welcome back.
Well, it's really great to see you again, Jim. It always is.
Well, good to have you here, though. The story is a tragic one that we are bringing forth to our listeners here this evening. We'll talk more about that. But you have been with us before in Focus, and for those that are not familiar with Grace and the story of what happened, go ahead and retell that here in brevity for us.
Well, I know you're going to show some videos of Grace. I won't go through Grace's life right now, but the short story of the hospital stay, we were following a protocol that was written by the frontline COVID critical care doctors, which included ivermectin, vitamins, and unfortunately a pulse oximeter. We started measuring Grace's oxygen saturation with that device, and on October 6th, it dropped to 88%. The protocol said, that's an emergency, check yourself into a hospital.
Fell below 90.
Fell below 90, and so we took Grace to the hospital. The emergency room physician suggested checking Grace into the hospital. Grace was doing fine, she just had a cold, but she suggested, let's check her into the hospital as a precautionary, 3-4 days on oxygen and a steroid, and she'll be fine. They would have just done that, Grace would be alive today.
Wow.
But they didn't, and I was with Grace from October 6th until the 10th. I was taken out by an armed guard on the 10th. We had to retain an attorney to get our daughter Jessica in as a replacement advocate. My wife Cindy could not do it at the time. Go ahead.
Have you pause right there,
Yeah.
and because the natural question many people will have is why? Why did it take an armed guard? What was going on in there that they did not want you in Grace's room?
Yeah, excellent question. Well, essentially two things, but they both fell under the umbrella that I started seeing what was going on. I was challenging things. So an example was the morning of October 9th. Grace was hungry. I started feeding Grace. Of course, Grace could feed herself, but she had a BiPAP mask on at that point. I started feeding Grace, and the nurse came running in and said, you can't do that. I said, well, what's the reason? And she said, well, Grace's oxygen saturation is only at 85%. And I thought, well, boy, she's doing great. It's impossible. And I had that same pulse oximeter with me. So I tested Grace's oxygen, and it read 95%. So I called her back in, and I said, is my meter accurate? And she said, yes, it is. Well, I said, well, why is my meter reading 95% and yours is reading 85%? And she said, because the leads get sweaty. I said, well, if you know that, why aren't you proactively changing out the leads, given this is the primary measurement you're using to manage my daughter's care?
Right.
And she shook her finger at me and said, you should just be thankful you caught this. So those were the type of things that were happening.
Right.
And I was being an advocate. That really was not what they wanted. And so the morning of the 10th of October, the nurse came in with an armed guard and said, you need to leave immediately. I said, what's the reason? She said, the last 3 shifts of nurses don't want you in the room. You've been shutting off the alarms at night, and we suspect you have COVID. And ultimately, I agreed to leave peacefully, and that was the last time I saw Grace alive.
Okay. And your daughter, though, was allowed to come in and be with her?
Well, we had to negotiate. So we retained an attorney. She negotiated with the hospital attorney. Grace did not have an advocate for 47 hours. Somebody with Down syndrome has a right to an advocate. We all have a right to an advocate, but she has a special right under the Americans with Disabilities Act. She was denied that right. During the 47 hours she didn't have an advocate, they chose to sedate Grace instead of taking care of her. They had started her on a sedation med called Precedex. They increased the dose 6 different times during that 47 hours.
I'm going to stop you here, Scott, because there are things that happened that even preceded this. As you entered the hospital, there was a request that was made more than once to you to give authorization for a ventilator for Grace.
That I see, now that I see the records and I've done the research, I see that was one of the driving forces. The pre-authorization for a ventilator was asked of me twice while I was in the hospital with Grace, but then it was asked twice of Cindy and I after I was escorted out by the armed guard. And it was always this idea that we want to have a pre-authorization because these types of things tend to happen in the middle of the night when we can't get a hold of the family. And we never approved a pre-authorization. Ultimately, on Grace's last day, if we turn the page to her last day, the doctor called Cindy and I at 10:12 in the morning. So I know these timestamps because of the lawsuit. At 10:12, and he started the call saying, what did you decide on the pre-authorization, which was the following up on the call from the night before. And we said, we're not going to do a pre-authorization for a ventilator. And he switched gears and said, Grace had such a good day yesterday, we should work on nutrition. We should get her out of bed today. And ultimately, because of that perspective, Grace had such a good day yesterday. We approved a feeding tube during that call. Unbeknownst to us at the time, the doctor had already strapped Grace down to the bed before the call even happened. She was made to defecate in the bed. While we were on the call, the nurse increased the dose of Precedex to the maximum allowable dose. Simultaneous with hanging up the call, he put the illegal do not resuscitate order on Grace.
So he issued a DNR on your daughter?
Correct.
Okay, do not resuscitate. And did you ever give authorization, your wife, your daughter, who was her advocate at the time, for such a measure to take place?
We found out that she was on DNR that evening. And the reason we found out is because after they increased the dose of Precedex to the maximum allowable dose, the nurse gave Grace 3 doses of lorazepam, which is contraindicated to Precedex. 3 doses at 11:25, 5:46, and 5:49. Then the doctor gave Grace morphine at 6:15. So if you add that all up in a 26-minute window, she was max dose Precedex, 3 doses of lorazepam, which has a 12-hour half-life. So they just add up, they become cumulative, and then the morphine was the kill shot. When Grace's numbers started tanking, Jess panic called Cindy and I on FaceTime.
Jess is your daughter.
Jess is our daughter, right? And we all started screaming, "Save our daughter." And Jess estimated about 30 nurses in the hallway because the shift changed. There was an armed guard in the hallway. We're screaming, and they holler back from the hallway, "She's DNR." That's when we first found out she was DNR.
So they weren't even coming in the room at that
They
point?
wouldn't come in the room. We screamed then back, "She's not DNR, save our daughter." And they refused. No medical professional came in to do anything. And we watched her die on that FaceTime call at 7:27 p.m. on October 13th of 2021.
Scott, again, our sympathies to you, your wife, your family. You relive this every time you tell the story, and those memories come back to your mind. Fast forwarding here, you have since then filed a wrongful death lawsuit on behalf of your daughter Grace.
Right, it's a civil case in Outagamie County. We filed the lawsuit on April 11th of 2023. After the lawsuit was filed, there were multiple motions to dismiss. Ultimately, the judge did not accept any of the motions to dismiss, and we had the green light for all 5 of our claims on October 30th of 2023, and that's what we've been working on. So once we knew the entire case was going forward, it opens up the interrogatories and depositions, and we finished those up in April, and now all the filings have been done, and we have a 2-day hearing coming up on May 19th and 20th.
Okay, so who is this lawsuit against?
It's against Ascension Hospital, and then it's against, it started out as 5 doctors and 2 nurses. We added a 6th doctor because of the depositions. And as you go through the process of a lawsuit, what happens is there's a legal principle called proximate cause. And so the doctor has to be directly connected with Grace's death. So while all the doctors were involved with Grace's stay in the hospital, in the end, there's 1 doctor who was directly connected. So in the process of all these filings, we dismissed 5 of the doctors due to the proximate cause legal principle.
Okay, now Grace's primary care physician is not allowed in the hospital at this time, right?
Well, strangely, if her primary care physician would have just seen Grace, so when Cindy called the primary care's office, they said we can't see her because she has COVID. And so then we went to urgent care, and that whole process ended up with Grace going by ambulance to the ER and ultimately checking into the hospital.
Okay. Well, Scott, you filed this wrongful death lawsuit, and we see the history of these across the nation. Most of these get thrown out, don't they?
Yeah, almost all of them get thrown out. The statistics are, it would shock you to see the numbers of how many medical malpractice lawsuits are filed. Most of them don't make it past the motions to dismiss. Then what happens next is most of them never get to trial because the attorneys are on retainer, and so they settle. And as part of a settlement, there's a gag order. So then none of these, what happened behind the curtain, never gets to see the light of day.
Yeah. Friends, we're going to tell you more about this story. We're going to tell you more about Grace, about this wrongful death lawsuit and what's happening within the court system. But more than that, we're going to talk about some history here as well. What has brought us to this point? Many, many years, 120 years of different decisions that have been made, leading us to the likes of what happened to Grace and what's happening to other people as well. But before we do that, let's see this special tribute to Grace.
In a world of quiet dreams, a girl with eyes so bright, Grace danced through life with love, a pure and gentle light. 19 years of beauty, Down syndrome's tender grace, taken by cold decisions in a sterile, shadowed place. Oh, Grace, our amazing Grace, your spirit softly glows, a fight for truth and freedom. In every heart it grows. Medical walls may falter, but justice still can rise. Grace's light shines on forever, beyond the olive skies. Oh, Grace, our amazing Grace, your spirit softly glows, a fight for truth and freedom. In every heart it grows. Medical walls may falter, but justice still can rise. Grace's light shines on forever, beyond the olive skies. In a world of quiet dreams, a girl with eyes so bright, Grace danced through life with love, a pure and gentle light. 19 years of beauty, Down syndrome's tender grace, taken by cold decisions in a sterile, shadowed place. Oh, Grace, our amazing Grace, your spirit softly glows, a fight for truth and freedom. In every heart it grows. Medical walls may falter, but justice still can rise. Grace's light shines on forever, beyond the olive skies. Our amazing Grace, a mission born of pain. Through faith and tender memory, her song will still remain.
A special tribute to Grace. A song with great meaning, telling the story, and again, just reliving the pictures. Scott, I know this pulls it out of you, your wife, every time you go through this, but a special gal. You didn't ask for this fight.
You know, Grace was the best thing God ever gave us, second to salvation. Mm-hmm. She was a gift. Yeah, we didn't ask for this. I would have never thought in a million years we were going to do this, but you know, as I look at it now, God prepared us for a time such as this. Mm-hmm. And you know, we're all in on this fight. Obviously, a civil lawsuit is a big deal, but it really has nothing to do with the lawsuit. The lawsuit has given us a platform to share a message, and a message about physically saving lives and spiritually saving lives. We believe we've been called under Genesis 50:20, which says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good, the saving of many lives, which is happening today. Right. And that's what our mission is.
You indicate, looking at your website and everything, your writings and so forth, that Grace's death is a result of medical murder.
Correct.
Some would say that's pretty harsh in saying that. You really believe that?
I believe it with all of my heart and soul, and the reason is it's gotten so much bigger than Grace's death. Mm-hmm. As I researched, you know, first your daughter's gone, so I mean you're in shock.
Right.
Then we got the medical records, and I see, okay, this doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. So you realize, okay, she was killed. So when the doctor, when the CEO from the hospital and the doctor refused to meet with me, just to go through. I just wanted to show them what I discovered so that history wouldn't repeat itself. And they refused to even meet. So I thought, well, that's kind of odd. I didn't know anything then. So I filed a claim with the Department of Safety and Professional Services. I didn't realize that was 10 doctors and 3 lay people appointed by the governor. And so they end up writing me a form letter with the evidence I presented and just said the doctor didn't do anything wrong. I thought, how is that possible? You put an illegal DNR and an illegal med combination, you did nothing wrong. And that was the first day when I got that letter in the mailbox. That was in January of 22, that I started to wake up to this idea of medical murder. And a pharmacist whistleblower came forward several months later, and she told me that in order for that med combination to happen, not only did the doctor have to order those meds, but the pharmacist had to sign off on that order because those meds are contraindicated. And she worked for Ascension, not in Wisconsin, but in a different Ascension facility. And she said, after the pharmacist signs off, there's an alarm that the nurse has to override to give Grace those meds. Wow. And the nurse who gave Grace the meds had 20 years of ICU experience. That's the day I realized Grace was murdered. Then you start digging. Why was she murdered? What was the reason for this? And that's when I found out there has been a long-term plan, a satanic plan to reduce the population. Yeah. And they have laid the groundwork over the last 120 years to be able to pull that off so that people don't even realize it's happening.
So you've gone through the full legal arena here at this point. Depositions have already taken place.
Yes.
You mentioned some days coming up, but did the depositions reveal anything to you that you did not know beforehand? Something that was just shocking to you?
There were 2 things that were shocking to me. One is to have doctors lie under oath. I thought when you're under oath, it shows you how naive I am that you tell the truth. So just a simple example without disclosing any of our strategy. One of the doctors who was the first doctor that was in charge of Grace's care, his name is Dr. Beck, and he wrote the first day's doctor report. And I never met Dr. Beck. And so when his deposition came up, he's talking about how he met me in the room. I was telling him about how Grace golfed with me. But I never met the man. He's completely lying. And when you read his report, the first day Grace was in the hospital, she just went in with a regular cannula. In his report, he writes that she has a BiPAP. I mean, you can look at somebody and see if they have a BiPAP. Right. It shows he never even looked at her.
Right.
So they lie under oath. So that was a shocker. The other shocker is their thought process on this DNR, because they think, how are they going to pull that off, right? How are they going to pull off the idea that they can put an illegal DNR on somebody? And what they said in depositions is that once somebody decides that they don't want a ventilator, it's the same as a DNR.
Oh my.
So that's the excuse that they use under oath.
Many people say, I don't want a ventilator, and it's like they're signing their own death warrant. I mean, the 2 are not compatible.
Well, that's why in our lawsuit we have a claim for a declaratory judgment by the judge that we want to make sure that people are protected going forward. Nobody should be able to put a DNR on another person other than the person themselves or somebody that they've given the power of attorney for healthcare to.
And who had the power of healthcare attorney for Grace?
Cindy and I did.
Okay. And again, no authorization ever for that. You forbid the ventilator. You did not give authorization, and they took that as being a DNR.
Well, that's the claim.
The claim that they're
that's
making.
The claim in the depositions,
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have a 2-day hearing coming up very, very soon. So what's going to happen at this hearing?
Multiple things happen. I was telling you off camera, it's a lot like you see on TV. So there will be the motion for summary judgment. That's the last ditch effort, the Hail Mary to throw out the case. They used a lot of the same, the defense used a lot of the same arguments in the other motions. We wrote a brilliant brief in opposition to the summary judgment. I think it's exceptional. It's the best work our legal team did so far. And their confidence is at an all-time high relative to us winning that argument. Then what happens after that is a number of the things relative to the trial get discussed and laid out for the trial. So the witness list, what type of evidence can be put into the trial, that will get discussed. That's called motions in limine. There is the jury instructions. So when the jury goes back to deliberate, we have to convince 10 of 12, by the way, so it's a very high bar. So the instructions that the jury gets when they go back...
It's a higher bar than President Trump had when he was inferred.
It's a high bar. I mean, the laws are against the plaintiff. So we want to make sure the jury instructions are read in the most favorable light, and then there's a questionnaire that's called a special verdict. So these are the questions that the jury has to answer yes or no and assign liability. So all the details of every question are discussed and agreed to over those 2 days, or not necessarily agreed to, the judge will decide, and that will lay out how the case goes for the 3-week jury trial that starts June 2nd.
Grace is not alone, having gone through this, is she?
There's 1.2 million Americans who were murdered in hospitals during the 39 months that we call COVID. And that number might sound small or large to a typical person, but it's huge. In fact, one of the statistics that I found when I started digging in is that America was number one of all 200 countries reporting in that statistic, which is COVID hospital deaths. Number 2 was India. India's population is 4 times that of the United States, and yet their death count in hospitals was 534,000, less than 50% of ours.
Do you attribute that to the protocols that we're following?
Absolutely. In fact, the protocols, you mentioned ventilators. Remdesivir was another common protocol. There was other ones also, but just take those 2. A ventilator had a 90% kill rate. Remdesivir had a 75% kill rate. Yet, if a doctor followed those protocols, so once we were in a public health emergency, then the FDA could put together emergency use authorization protocols. So that was ventilators, remdesivir, and a few other ones. If a doctor follows those, not only were they directly incentivized by the government, but they have complete immunity from liability if a patient dies under those protocols. So if Cindy and I would have given a pre-authorization for a ventilator, I can almost guarantee you Grace would have been put on a ventilator because that's where the money was, and Grace would have died 22 days later because that was the amount of time somebody was on a ventilator.
Scott, how were doctors incentivized?
So there was incentives directly for testing somebody with COVID, so entering the COVID diagnosis into the record. They're incentivized by all the emergency use authorization protocols. So remdesivir, so if they got a patient on remdesivir, which I don't know the number for remdesivir because I didn't study that, but I think it was 3,000 a day for remdesivir. And then if they were able to convince the patient to get on remdesivir, they received a 20% bonus over the whole hospital stay.
From who?
From the government.
Oh my.
Yeah, this is, the government has indirectly incentivized healthcare since for sure 1980, but this was direct incentive versus indirect. And the ventilator had a $39,000 bonus if the patient was on a ventilator for just 96 hours. The ventilator payday, given the 22 days I mentioned, was about a $300,000 payday to the hospital. And if Grace would have died on a ventilator, Jim, here's the whopper, we would not have a lawsuit, because they were immune from liability if they followed those protocols.
Grace was ushered into eternity October 13th, 2021. What does her death certificate say?
Yeah, that's a great question. That one hits a nerve because people ask, what do you want out of this lawsuit? And I always tell them personally, I just want the death certificate changed to the truth. What it says is that Grace died of acute respiratory failure with hypoxemia as a result of COVID-19 pneumonia. That diagnosis gave the hospital another $21,000 of government incentive money. And what should it say? It should say that Grace died from a contraindicated med combination of Precedex, lorazepam, and morphine as a result of an illegal do not resuscitate order. That's what it should say.
Scott Schara with us here tonight on inFocus, and talking about what Grace experienced, what they all experienced in the hospital, and that non-authorized DNR placed on his daughter at that time, a deadly cocktail, a combination of medicines, if you will, to take her life. I mean, that's the medicines that they did what they were designed to do when they interact with one another. And Grace's life was taken. A lawsuit has been filed against the medical provider, doctors that were engaged with this. And again, they have an event in the court coming up on the 19th and 20th of May. And I understand that if all goes as is designed, that June 2nd is the actual starting of the trial with the selection of the jury.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, so jury selection, they expect to take the entire day just because the trial has gotten so much publicity. The judge, a typical 12-person jury, he'll bring 24 in. He's bringing 75 in. So they're expecting it could be as long as a day to do the jury selection for the first day.
You brought with you tonight a chart, and we're going to show on TV. I'm going to have you explain that for us because, and as you've done research in all of this, Scott, you found that this is just not an isolated incident that just happened at some point in history here. Rather, there's been a movement through 120 years that has led us to this point. And if you could kind of explain what has happened over these 120 years.
So what happens if you're going to have a master plan that people can't see, when you have to implement it over time and
slowly
over time. So then it's like the boiling frog phenomena, it happens slowly over time so you don't recognize that you're boiling to death. Well, this has happened in medicine in the recent history. It's actually happened all the way back to the Hippocratic Oath in 400 BC. So the programming with the Hippocratic Oath, just to start our discussion, is people believe it says first do no harm. Well, if you read the original Hippocratic Oath, it's actually an oath to 4 satanic gods. So it's no wonder why it's not working in God's economy, it's working in Satan's economy. Well, if you start this train in the last 120 years, it really starts in 1905 with Jacobson versus Massachusetts. That's huge because that set in motion the satanic principle of collectivism. So in simple terms, collectivism means the good of the population versus the good of the individual. God is an individualist, not a collectivist. Collectivism is a communist philosophy, but it's infiltrated the entire medical industrial complex. In Jacobson versus Massachusetts, the Supreme Court decided 7-2 in favor of the state of Massachusetts. The pastor, Jacobson, did not want to take the smallpox vaccine. He even presented evidence that the vaccine was causing side effects, including cancer. The Supreme Court denied all of that and said, there is times when the good of the population, the government has the right to have a public health emergency, and the good of the population is at stake at the expense of the good of the individual.
Wow.
So that set in motion a whole series of laws, and that's how they could not have pulled off COVID without Jacobson versus Massachusetts.
Then there's also the 1910 Flexner report. What was that?
Yeah, the Flexner report. So the Carnegie family hired Abraham Flexner, and the idea was, hey, we're evolved as a population. We don't need these archaic processes anymore like chiropractic, naturopathic, osteopathic, and so they invented allopathic medicine, conventional medicine. What we consider trust the science today, that was invented with the Flexner report. Then the Rockefeller family jumped on the bandwagon and funded all the medical schools to say, we've got to follow this Flexner report, and so allopathic medicine became the gold standard. That's what we're following today. That's why when they're following these protocols, they've been programmed, these doctors have been programmed through medical school that these protocols are what does it.
So I've heard a physician then during a time when somebody was having COVID, and when they were questioned, they would say, oh no, I follow the journals, I follow the science, I do this, I've put a lot of research into it. Well, it goes back to this time, doesn't it?
It goes back to the Flexner report, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, then you mentioned even fiat currency is tied into all this.
Well, because with fiat currency, there's no accountability. So once we had a fiat currency, we went off the gold standard, and they used this threat. It just came out. It comes out about twice a year. The threat that there's too many people on Medicare and Medicaid. We've got to reduce we got to do something to cut it's too much out of the budget. Well, they never have any intention to balance the budget. It's all to promote the rationing care model. So what happened once you have a fiat currency, you can buy anybody with money. The love of money is the root of all sorts of evil. So only the godly people are not going to be bought by that system of money. So right now with Medicare and Medicaid, any doctor who accepts Medicare and Medicaid in his practice has to follow the standards of care that are dictated by CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So that's how the government is controlling healthcare.
And so that's why you bring up Social Security and Medicare as also being in this chart of events.
We gave away our birthright for the government to take care of us financially once Social Security came into existence. And then Medicare came into existence on July 1 of 1965 under President Johnson. When that got put in place, it's always a lie when they're put in place. We got to take care of the elderly. We got to take care of the disabled. And that's where where Medicare got put in place. Well, now fast forward to today. This is all why I say it's by design. Look at what's going on today. We have 135 million Americans on Medicare and Medicaid. The bureaucracies that fund the people on those two systems account for $5 trillion a year, over 50% of the annual federal budget. Right. So they are screaming, we got to do something about, there's too many people on the plan, we got to do something about the budget. And their method to do something about it is rationing care. And rationing care means hastening death, which is murder.
HHS.
Health and Human Services came into existence in 1980. That was by design also, because what their goal was to turn over the establishment of a public health emergency unilaterally to the Health and Human Services Secretary. So they set up this department in 1980 to facilitate just exactly what happened with the public health emergency with COVID.
A couple other 1980s issues, the Chevron doctrine and something called standards of care.
The Chevron doctrine, interesting, was overturned last July, but the damage is already done. So what the Chevron doctrine did was said Congress should not have oversight over these bureaucracies. The bureaucracies should be able to write their own rules. And so when bureaucracies can write their own rules without oversight, what do you think happens? Right. Well, that mutates into standards of care. And I'll go on a little bit of a rabbit trail with standards of care because it shows how nefarious this is. So standards of care started in the early 80s. These were designed by insurance companies as cost control measures. Ultimately, this is how the government got involved with medical care directly or indirectly, is through the insurance companies. The insurance companies write the standards of care. So an example, Jim, is the standard of care for cancer. Just about everybody knows what that is. So they know it's radiation, chemo, or surgery. So take chemo. If a doctor recommends something outside of the standard of care, he will not get reimbursed by insurance, and he will lose his license. Mm-hmm. He has to follow the standard of care if he accepts Medicare or Medicaid. So we get cancer, we go in to the doctor, he does the biopsy, comes back, I can get your chemo started next week. And all the person's program, the doctor's program, and the person asks, well, does my insurance cover it? And the doctor says, yes, good news, you're all covered. Chemo has a 97.9% kill rate. You look at the 5-year history, all cancers across the board, 2.1% success rate. So why are they doing that? Well, it's because of what I said earlier. The rationing care model is alive and well because of the satanic principle or the satanic belief. We have too many people on the planet, we don't have enough resources, but the programming that they're using at the local level, at the federal level and the state level is we've got to balance the budget. And the only way to do that is hasten death. You
mentioned also the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986. What does vaccine have to do with this?
Great question. So that was passed by Ronald Reagan on November 14th of 1986. What that act did, that act has killed and maimed more people than any other single act other than Roe versus Wade in our country. It gave immunity from liability for downstream injuries for all vaccines. So when these manufacturers produce a vaccine and somebody dies or somebody becomes disabled as a result of it, they're immune from liability.
Next, you have the public health emergency. And I find this interesting because even when something happens, all of a sudden we see all these states have these Model State Emergency Health Powers Act already drafted, ready to go, even when something is just unfolding at that particular time.
Well, this was, again, put in place all the way from Jacobson versus Massachusetts. So a public health emergency is now unilaterally implemented by the Health and Human Services Secretary. This is a big deal. So when COVID started, the public health emergency, the only oversight is that he has to renew it every 3 months. So the COVID public health emergency was renewed every 3 months for 39 months. Well, what happens is when we are under a public health emergency, the hospitals are under military control because we're under a public health emergency. The military takes control under a public health emergency.
Wow. We're going to continue this in just a moment, but friends, due to time, I'm going to open our phone lines. You can start getting online with your questions here for our guest. A question or a brief comment. Our phone number is 414-935-3030. 414-935-3030. Toll free, you can reach us at 800-733-8830. That's 800-733-8830. If you have questions you'd like to ask pertaining to this lawsuit that's going on right now, Incentivized Healthcare, questions pertaining to that, our topic of discussion, Grace, whose life was taken following the whole procedures that were unleashed before her, the DNR that was placed on, deadly cocktail administered, well, the drugs did exactly what they were designed to do. We take your phone calls here tonight, 414-935-3030 or 800-733-8830. You also talk about the merger of Social Security and Medicare fitting into all of this.
So the Clintons gave us that in 1997, and before that you could take Social Security and not take Medicare. Well, now they combine those, so people have paid in their whole life to Social Security, not as much to Medicare. They don't really realize it. They think they're paying into Social Security only, but they want to get their Social Security when they retire. Well, now, as soon as they take Social Security at 65, they are also on Medicare. And the Medicare standards of care, again, they should be called standards of death. They are not designed for your health. They are designed to ration care.
Wow. Every one of these points we could talk a long time on, but let's move to 2005, the PrEP Act.
So the PrEP Act, it was interesting how a lot of these acts are passed either Christmas time or Thanksgiving time when the media is asleep. So this one was tagged on to an appropriations bill for the military. Had nothing to do with the military, but the PrEP Act provides immunity from liability whenever there's a public health emergency and emergency use authorizations are put in place. So as long as the medical industrial complex follows those protocols, they're immune from liability.
Obamacare came into being as well.
Yeah, Obamacare passed March 23rd of 2010. The whopper in Obamacare is Section 1553. And I'll focus on that for a minute because you mentioned the Canadians at the beginning of the show. So the Canadians have the Medical Assistance in Dying program, the MAID program. Well, we invented that. Obamacare Section 1553 legalized euthanasia in America. People don't realize it, but it's that section that started the euthanasia program legally. It's been in place way before that, but they have legal authorization courtesy of Obamacare.
And then the repeal of the Smith-Mundt Act.
So I call it repeal. Technically, it's the modernization. So the Smith-Mundt Act was put in place in 1948. The idea was the United States government, by law, could used propaganda against citizens of all other countries, but not us. In 2012, that was modernized so the government could now use propaganda against its own citizens. So during COVID, we saw this. We saw safe and effective, safe and effective. Simply not true. The Brook Jackson lawsuit was filed on January 8th of 2021. There was a document filed by the government just last week, April 28th, that said they acknowledged that the Brook Jackson lawsuit, which said that Pfizer did no testing of the vaccine. The government acknowledged that there was no testing, but they want to have the case dismissed. This was just filed last week, April 28th, because it conflicts with the health policy of the United States government, which the health policy of the United States government is vaccinate, vaccinate, vaccinate.
So that's 14 on your list.
Yes.
What's number 15? In other words, where are we going?
Well, I think the only way out of this, we're not going to get out of it by a new administration. We're not going to get out of it by RFK Jr. being the HHS secretary. This is all by design. They're never going to cut off the head of the snake. So I believe the only way out of this is repentance. We all participated in this system, most of us tacitly. We didn't realize it. I did a recording on this particular research called Escaping Babylon, Part 1, the physical escape. So how do you escape something? Well, first you got to realize you're in it. So that's why I'm presenting these 14 points. You realize, oh my gosh, we are in Babylon. So how do we get out? God's calling his people out, and he calls them out through repentance.
Friends, you're watching inFocus, and again, it's a long story, but one that really needs to be grasped as to where we're going in this nation with our healthcare system and the standards of care that have been adopted on so many different issues. Is it care? Is it not? We're opening our phone lines here tonight, and we are welcome to take your calls, questions that you may have on this issue. Our number is 414-935-3030. 414-935-3030 or 800-733-8830. That's 1-800-733-8830. I'd like to ask you, Scott, how is intimidation being used in the medical field today? I've seen so many that will suggest, hey, wait, let's go back to COVID. You know, can we get ivermectin? Can we get? And it's what? You know, it's not scientifically proven. Intimidation, that's used quite a bit, isn't it? I mean, is somebody wearing a white coat automatically trumps common sense at times?
Well, they look down on you. So, I mean, the intimidation comes in a lot of different forms. I mean, so they look down on you. Some of them have an arrogance factor. I mean, I dealt with that when Grace was in the hospital where, you know, they think they know more than you. They had suggested that I approve a drug for Grace called tocilizumab, for example. Subsequent, I found out that was another emergency use authorization drug that had a $22,000 payday per dose. So I didn't realize it at the time, but when I started researching the drug, and I showed the doctor my research from the New England Journal of Medicine, which showed that the placebo group did better than the drug group, and the drug had 15, 16 side effects. And he got mad at me. So, I mean, that was an intimidation. The one that's more common that I see now, which some people have seen this when, you know, you can't get a heart transplant unless you're vaccinated.
Right.
Well, that's intimidation. We won't do this surgery unless you sign a DNR. That's intimidation. These are real things that are happening right now.
Well, and when you think about that, we know that many people have had heart attacks as a result of the shot.
Yes.
We've seen that through the vaccine adverse events reporting system. And yet, we're saying you can't do heart surgery on you unless you get the shot? I mean, it's like...
It's ridiculous. I'm one of our attorneys on the team. Warner Mendenhall has done the statistics on how many people have died of the shot in America, and he estimates 500,000 have already died from the shot.
You were a patient advocate for your daughter, Grace, and I'd like you to speak to the importance of patient advocacy.
If I would have known then what I know now about advocacy, Grace would be alive. If I would have never taken Grace to the hospital, she'd be alive. If the hospital would have only done oxygen and steroids, she'd be alive. But if I would have understood advocacy the way I understand it today, Grace would be alive. So let me be very specific about advocacy. Your advocate, so you pick an advocate. The advocate can be a family member, but the highest priority for a characteristic of the advocate is that they're awake to what is going on and they will stand up for you when you can't. So you have a medical power of attorney document, then that person would become your advocate. Before the advocacy, you would want to have what's called an advance directive. So you have laid out the care that you want. You want unvaccinated blood, for example. You don't want a DNR, and those medical directives get put on your online chart. Before you'd even go into a hospital, you're not going to sign that little blank screen. You want to make sure you're not signing your rights away because that's what they want. Now, when you are in the hospital, the advocate has to make sure the doctor follows informed consent. And this is the big one that I did not understand. Informed consent is 2 words, informed and consent. So the doctor's responsibility is to inform you. With the meds that Grace was given, we didn't have any idea. They never told us anything. So they told me about tocilizumab. I found out under oath. Why did they talk about tocilizumab, but they didn't talk about Precedex, lorazepam, and morphine? Because they had to, because that was an emergency use authorization drug. So you've got to make sure the doctor's informing you of every single, the pros, cons, risks, benefits, and then take your time. Don't feel the pressure to give consent. Do your research. Have somebody on the outside, a doctor that you can talk with. And then give your consent as a separate event without pressure from the doctor.
Yeah, get the information. Let's go to the phone lines. By the way, our phone number here, 414-935-3030, 414-935-3030, toll free at 800-733-8830. Now, we've got a caller from Grafton. Caller, go ahead, you're on the air.
Hello. I just wanted to thank you for being there. And for sharing the story about Grace. I was listening to the information while I was on hold, and I think you've kind of answered the question. I just wondered, do you have any suggestions about precautions that should be taken before going into the hospital? I know that you're not giving legal advice, but you've had a lot of experience, so I just wanted to find that out.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a great question. So I gave several points before your call came in, but I would add one more. On Grace's website, which is ouramazinggrace.net, we have a resource tab, and one of the tabs is linked to a source called The Wedge. And The Wedge are all doctors and nurses who have pledged to not accept Medicare and Medicaid. They are taking cash patients. I would tell everybody to get a relationship with somebody who is not in the system, because then they can be objective about your health care and they're not controlled by the CMS standards of care.
Thank you for the call. Again, 414-935-3030 is the number. Scott, under Obamacare and since that time, we have seen the explosion of coding that medical personnel have to do. Everything has a code and subcodes for everything that goes on. And we find that there have been a number of doctors just say, I'm done with this. I'm not going to do that. So much time is being involved with that. So a lot of private practice has been discontinued as a result. Additionally, there have been those doctors that I'm not going to deal with it anymore. I'm going to go into a system. And so being part of a system, they then don't have to worry about all that extra paperwork. Somebody else will take care of it for them. But by being in that system, then they're having to follow the standards of care or what other dictates that are coming down administratively.
Well, that's absolutely right on. And the standards of care are getting codified through AI. That's the next level. So you asked me about number 15 before. I mean, 15 on that list, I don't want to be on that list anymore, but number 15 on that list is AI. Most people are familiar with the Epic system. So the Epic system, basically you plop in the statistics on the patient and it plops out a standard of care. So then all the billing codes, everything all fits, and so the doctor, all he has to do is follow that procedure. Interestingly, if a doctor, again, why do we have a lawsuit? Because we didn't accept the ventilator. But also, if Grace would have died through a standard of care, so somebody dies of the standard of care for cancer, no lawsuit. So the EPIC system, if they're following the standard of care that gets spit out through AI via EPIC, they're immune from liability.
My. And that's huge, and that's happening all the time.
People don't realize it. We've been programmed to trust the white coat. And there are white coats who deserve to be trusted.
Right.
You started the show with that, and I couldn't agree more. But if you just think about it, there's a conflict of interest. And so if you get somebody who is not accepting Medicare and Medicaid, that means they're not bound by those standards of care.
Wow. Friends, you're tuned to inFocus here on WVCY Channel 30. We're going to pick up another call here, and we've got line number 1 is Maureen. Hi, Maureen, you're on the air. Hello, Maureen, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Hello, I wanted to tell Mr. Schara what a hero I think he is and how he is certainly an advocate for his daughter, for his family, and for all of us by informing us as to what's going on with the medical system.
Yeah.
I really appreciate what he's doing.
Great. Thank you so
That's
much.
for sure. I admire him, and I pray God bless him and his family.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Maureen. It's very humbling to be in this position. You realize, I wish I would have never been in the position because we had to lose our daughter to get here. So, God has us in this for a reason. So God gets the credit, Joe.
Well, as you mentioned from Genesis chapter 50, what was intended for evil, God has planned it for good.
Exactly.
And I know that you find it very much the situation in even the little logo that you use here, it's David versus Goliath in all of this as well.
Right.
You've got a lot of information on a couple of websites. Just tell us about the sites.
So the main site I already referenced, ouramazinggrace.net, and on that site you will find all of the research that I have done so far. What we're focused on right now, though, is graceschara.com, and the reason is because that site is run by our daughter Jessica. She has set up a tab on that site that says fill the courtroom. So on the upper left-hand corner when you go to that site, anybody that can make it to the jury trial, we want you to be there. So if you go to the fill the courtroom, you can also sign up on that site and get legal updates, but we want you to fill the courtroom. We want to show support for Grace to the jury. This is an uphill battle. We're not home yet.
Yes, Scott, thanks for being with us here tonight. And we ask our viewers to be praying for you, the lawsuit as well during this time.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
Scott Schara with us tonight, ouramazinggrace.net and graceschara.com. And friends, you'll get a lot of your questions answered there as well. Pray for them. God bless you, friends. Thanks for joining us on inFocus.